units and Ekota. On November 7th, 1975, Miasa and Mizura and Mugmuk were captured in Minneapolis by what Marissa called an army of FBI and police Gestapo armed to kill. 5 years later, an essay entitled Profile of the Revolutionary Married Couple, end quote, Miasa declared that he was Mizrahi, belonged to the Republic of New Africa and the Black Liberation Army, and had been engaged in efforts to establish armed clandestine formations throughout the Black colony within the continent of Euro-America. They were brought to New Jersey to stand trial for the murder of Oxer Lowett, a store operator who had been fatally shot near the Monmouth Park racetrack on July 5th. And yet, because they were under 24-hour surveillance, the state knew that Mugmex did not carry out this murder. Massa argued, knew that Mugmex did not carry out this murder. Massa argued, rather, the charge was part of a conspiracy that aimed to, quote, frame us for whatever crime or crimes conducted. Rather, the charge was part of a conspiracy that aimed to, quote, frame us for whatever crime or crimes conducted to take us out of Revolutionary Commission or face the music of violent death. Along with a man named O'Neill Davis, Miasa and Mizura were indicted. Indicted? Hold on, I gotta look at this word, everybody. Oh, you're good. I'd be upset. It's your country, you know? You have every right. You gotta look at this word, everybody. Oh, you're good. I'd be upset. It's your country, you know? You have every right. Your anger is valid. It's indicted for first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The state narrative was that Lowett's wife hired the trio to assassinate her husband for infidelity, held on $10,000 bail. The Mugmuks pleaded not guilty. They maintained that they were the targets of a frame-up. Miasa was for the second time in his life. After a 7-day prosecution, what relied on testimonies of Davis, who cooperated in exchange for drastically reduced sentence. Miasa and Mugmuk were found guilty and sentenced to life, granting executive clemency in 1985. Mizrahi was paroled in 1988. Massa was less fortunate. He spent the next 33 years in a New York Jersey prison system where he endured yet another experiment that would have profound implication for incarcerated people everywhere. Miasa's incarceration in Trenton State Prison occurred shortly after its Management Control Unit, MCU, became operational, launched in 1975 with BPP and BLA veterans Sendata Akuli as one of its first victims. This ultra-punitive prison within a prison was designed to perform the counter-revolutionary function that New York prison-crats had discussed in the immediate aftermath of Attica. A person did not have to violate any rules to land in MCU. They only needed to be black and display certain intangible qualities that made them potentially, quote, troublemakers, leaders, or incorrigibles. Certain intangible qualities that made them potentially, quote, troublemakers, leaders, or incorrigibles in the eyes of the state. As Miasa explained, quote, whether they are jailhouse lawyers, Afrocentric, Muslim, Pan-Africanist, Black nationalists, or whatever their affiliation, Brothers was placed in MCU because of their political consciousness. With only a few brief interruptions, Miasa was held in the MCU between 1976 and 2000, a total of 24 years. During our conversation about his life behind the walls, Miyasa's narration constantly shifted across time and carceral geographies. A story about RX program might seamlessly bleed into a story about the MCU and vice versa. This narrative style accurately situates these programs as the fruit of the same putrid tree. Indeed, activist scholars have traced the non-touch torture techniques employed in MCU like Trenton, as well as the enhanced interrogation techniques currently employed by the National Security State as part of the global war on terror, to the CIA's brain warfare research. Narratives of sleeping deprivation, sensory deprivation, prolonged isolation, stress positions, humiliation, intimidation, exposure to extreme temperatures, perpetual lightning, punishing noise pollution, several restricted visitations, correspondence, and phone privileges, among other forms of profound trauma, emerge from the testimonials of those who have endured these sites within and beyond U.S. borders. In 1979, a few months before his co-defendant Assata Shakur escaped prison, Sendata Akuli, a member of the Panther 21, was transferred from the MCU to Marion Federal Penitentiary in Southern Illinois. Marion was one of the federal prison system's key penal laboratories where behavior modification experiments similar to those explored in ACTEC, Vacaville, and elsewhere were taking place. Back in 1973, Morans Rordan had framed these experiments in explicitly counter-revolutionary terms. The purpose of the Moran Control Unit is to control revolutionary attitudes in the prison system and in the society at large. Hold on a second. Don't know who you are. A decade later, let me make sure. I am from City Refugee Camp. Hey! Sophie from Gaza. Hello. A decade later, federal prison crats converted Marion into a permanent lockdown institution. What is needed in the federal prison system is an institution which incorporates the latest in technology and program features within its new concepts of control and security. Noted a government report describing transformation for the next 23 years, Marion's entire captive population, many of whom understood themselves and were understood by the state to be political. Marion's entire captive population, many of whom understood themselves and were understood by the state to be political revolutionaries, were subjected to no-touch torture while confined in individual cages for 23 hours per day and sometimes longer. During the 1980s and 1990s, using the Trenton and Marion control units as their templates, prison crats proliferated similar repressive carceral sites in virtually every state. In the templates, prison crats proliferated similar repressive carceral sites in virtually every state in the nation. According to most recent and best available data on U.S. carceral practices, at least 80,000 people are held in some form of solitary confinement on any given day in the United States. An estimated 448,000 people have been isolated in the last 12 months, and these people are disproportionately Black and other people of color, people who are queer, and people with disabilities. These forms of isolations go by a variety of official euphemisms: management control units, special housing units, secure housing units, communication management units, administrative maximum facility, restrictive housing, punitive segregation, disciplinary segregation, administrative segregation, among others. While the names vary, the purpose remains consistent. As Nancy Kershan, author of Out of Control, a 15-year battle against control unit prison, explains, quote, "We reasoned and asserted that just as prisons were to control rebellion in society, control unit prisons were to control other prisons, and that the holes or boxes within control unit prisons were used to control control unit prisons, etc. Just boxes stuffed in boxes, coupled with severe limits on what incarcerated people can read, listen to, and watch. This statecraft of isolation, torture, and manipulation inflicts the chilling ongoingness of this war on the mind, a war that has the Black Revolutionary at its center, but it's promiscuous in its aim. Epilogue. Brother Tyrone, at the Attica Survivor, told me a haunting story that actually, let me stop for a second. Is everybody okay? Does anybody have any questions? Because no one has any coins, my friend. I don't have any coins. I'm sorry. Sent an invite. No. Okay. Anybody have any questions before I move on to the next? I think we're almost done with this book. All right. No questions. Okay. Brother Tyrone, an Attica survivor, told me a haunting story that exemplifies how conditions inside New York State Prison have changed since 1970s. It occurred shortly before his release in 1993, a year that marks the moment when Black men incarcerated in the House of Detention for Men on Rikers Island founded a chapter of the United Blood Nation, a state organization that had flourished in California since early as 1970s. The New York Bloods formed the response to highly organized Latin formations such as the Latin Kings and the Natillas, who maintained control over telephones, television, and other key resources. By meting out intense violence against unauthorized Black captives like wildfires, the organization spread within Rikers to other city jails, the state prison system, and the outside world. This growth accompanied what Tyrone and many others perceived as an aversion on the part of oppressed groups to rebellion against the state and a associated increase in inter-scene violence among those groups. For many, 1993 was a watershed in a slow disintegration of prison movements. While heading to this work release program, Tyrone witnessed an increasingly common occurrence, an argument between a small group of young people over what to watch on TV. While he did not get involved, he struck up a conversation with one of the young people. Later that night, he learned that his new associate was 20 years old, that he was just beginning a 40-year prison sentence, and that he could not read or write. Back in 1970, when Tyrone first entered the system, an underground political organization would have looked upon this kid as a prime candidate for recruitment, after which they would have helped him become literate and usher him through the process of ideological development. But in 1993, he was a prime candidate for the Bloods, an organization that embraced what many from Tyrone's generation called the criminal mentality. Looking forward to beginning a new chapter in his life after spending more than 2 decades behind walls, Tyrone offered a few words and advice. He implored that young men to spend his time wisely, to learn to read and write, to educate himself, and to work towards obtaining his freedom by using the law libraries present in every New York State prison as a result of the Attica Rebellion. The kid seemed receptive and motivated to follow Tyrone's advice. However, the next morning, as he was again heading to his work release program, Tyrone found him sitting in front of the TV in the common area, watching cartoons while sucking his thumb. A literal image of what I have been calling prison pacification. The primary aim of this book has been to show that U.S. prisons are a site of war. While the story I have told begins in the late 20th century, I employ a Black radical imperative framework and that locates the origins of this war in the 16th century with the onset of European trade in enslaved Africans. the rise of capitalism as the world system, the global project, patriarchal white supremacy that underwrites it. From that time of its formation, a U.S. state has used its monopoly over the legitimate use of violence via law, policing, and prisons to reproduce capitalist social relations to a project that is tantamount to permanent race and class war. I have examined a specific moment within this war, one that materialized during the late 1960s, a time when prison crats, elected officials, national security actors, and academics, many of whom participated in a campaign to pacify anti-colonial movements abroad, increasingly looked to U.S. prisons as indispensable to the domestic counterinsurgency against militant social movements. As part of the hard and explicitly repressive side of this multifaceted campaign, these agents of the state employed carceral institutions to stifle Black intellectuals, culture, and political development, neutralize autonomous Black radical organizations, thwart Black internationalism, eradicate Black rebellion, manipulate Black sexuality, and destroy Black revolutionary minds. Analyzing what I have termed the Long Attica Revolt, I have also shown that prisons are sites of counter-war, a term that reflects the fact that captives rebel or responding to an antagonism they did not initiate. By subordinating the state archive to criminalized and pathologized Black epistemologies, I detail how people behind the walls rebelled in complex and protracted ways that are under theorized in existing conversations about Black radicalism in general, and the Attica Rebellion specifically. I stretch the geography of Attica beyond a single incarceral site and show that it was not a single event that can be contained within linear notions of time, but an unruly structure of revolt that is inseparable from putatively bygones forms a Black radical struggle. I demonstrated that formal demands for improved prison conditions did not reflect the totality of what the rebels wanted, and that such demands were internally contested by rebels who understood the ease with which a pragmatic political approach rendered their struggles vulnerable to co-optation. In addition to petitioning the war-waging state, imprisoned people engaged in conspicuous forms of physical, culture, and psychological epistemic, narrative, spiritual, and affective insurgency that aim to expose the amalgamate carceral repression while also abolishing the anti-Black class war of which prisons are a part. Imprisoned revolutionaries developed above ground and underground formations of guerrilla warfare, nurtured intimacy and solidarities that transcend prison walls, as well as national boundaries, creating illicit infrastructures of Black study and archivization, and engage in armed and unarmed insurgency against the state. Communist win? What's that mean? Why am I winning? I don't know. Why am I winning? By tracing the unfolding of this revolt, collision with constantly mutating technologies of state violence, Tip of the Spear clarified the cultural asymmetry of this war. Oh, okay. State actors waged an imperialist war, a war of capture and conquest that had the production of slaves as its unspoken object. This invocation of slavery does not depend on critical interpretations of law, the 13th Amendment, Ruffin versus the Commonwealth, etc., nor an uneven condition of labor exploitation within carceral institutions, nor on grand theories of the ontological position of blackness under Western modernity. Neither does it depend solely on the voices of incarcerated people who frequently narrate themselves as slaves. Rather, it depends on the critical analysis of imperialist war and counterinsurgency in theory and practice. In his influential On War, Persian general Karl von Clausewitz defines war as, quote, an act of force to compel our enemy to do our will, and clarifies that the immediate aim of war is to disarm the enemy and destroy their capacity for resistance. This ambition to abolish a subject's capacity for autonomy and independent will is tantamount to the desire for absolute mastery over a enslaved population. Tip of the spear has elaborated the various ways that state actors try to fail to achieve this goal sadistically. Inventive forms of physical violence, isolation, psychological and psychiatry, assault, sexual terror propaganda, liberal reforms, and white supremacist science and technology as an articulation of black radical counter-war. The Long Attica Revolt did not pursue an equivalent aim. The rebels struggled for reprieve, autonomy, internal transformation, and diverse visions of collective freedom, liberation, revolution, and abolish. As I demonstrate, they engage in collective and targeted acts of counter-violence, for which many were labeled, quote, extremists or terrorists, even though the physical trauma their resistance produced paled in comparison to that against which it responded. At the same time, I show that unlike the violence of incarceral warfare states, political counter-violence from below did not reflect the core of the revolt. Rather, it was only the outermost layer of the manifold struggle that was ultimately about the capacity of black radical futurity. The evolution of human beings, the pervasion of historical consciousness, and the preservation of historical consciousness, the development of love and intimacy, and the search for new ways of organizing social life that were not rooted in domination, extraction, or accumulation, ensnared with the boughs of an anti-human regime, and aimed to destroy them in every conceivable way. The dreads of the capitalist social order refashioned themselves into combatant theorists of a new form of war that nurtured radically new forms of social life through the improvisation of rebellion. Across the preceding chapters, the words and deeds of the protagonists demonstrate this fact again and again. Theorizing the prisons as a site of active combat helps explain the breathtaking proliferation of U.S. prisons over the past 5 decades. Scholars, activists, and government officials representing diverse perspectives have analyzed and debated the extent of which patterns of criminalization, drug use, racial animus, and policing, as well as shifts in demographics, the labor market, social movements, ideology, and the global political economy have propelled incarceral expansion. What has been largely overlooked is the extent to which the prison construction boom of the 1980s and 1990s was a direct response to black rebellion behind the walls, erupting on the cusp of the United States globally and historically unprecedented experiment of human caging. The Long Attica Revolt revealed to actors at the highest level of state power that to effectively control captives populations, they would need more and better prisons. As I showed in Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, counterinsurgency experts responded to the revolt by expanding and diversifying carceral networks in ways that facilitate the strategic disaggregation of captive population across geographies to maximize control. This diversification strategy aimed to resolve a crisis that was concentrated inside the prison, the crisis of radical imprisoned intellectuals and combatants whose influence on broader population within and beyond the walls had to be eliminated. Carceral expansion facilitated this strategy and therefore must be seen as a counter-revolutionary imperative. To see the prisons as an institutionalized form of counterinsurgency is to apprehend how not only spectacular violence, but mundane, progressive, and humanizing reforms are constantly being weaponized against the capacity for radical thought. Incarcerated for the next 4 decades, unable to read or write, passively sitting in front of a television while soothing himself in an infantile way. The young person Tyrone encountered in 1993 was not simply a wayward youth. He was a target of a war he may not have known was unfolding. Prior to Attica, the few televisions that existed within prison walls were only accessible in common areas during the limited times, a situation that forced those interests in stimulating their minds to read, write, and study, often in ways that radicalized them. After Attica, when prison crafts expanded access to television, movement elders began noticing a pronounced decline in young people desiring to read. I once spent 4 months in the box for Waiting to Read, Soledad Brothers by George Jackson. I saw it in here yesterday in the garbage, explained Auburn and Attica survivor Jomo Omawale during the late 1970s. These kids have no idea. They have the right to read these things and they can't even read. I walked around with these bullets from Attica in my back. What the hell did I do this for? He asked his wife. The following decades, NYC DOCS initiated a program allowing captives to have TVs in their individual cells, while vocal fractions of the increasingly conservative public interpreted this privilege as evidence that prisons were going soft. On the monsters they were said to contain. An article in the Prison Trade magazine clarified these paternalistic and counterinsurgent logics of this reform. Incorrigible criminals were vulnerable to the same disciplinary philosophy as a recalcitrant child. Inmates must spend 24 hours in each day to same as everybody else. They can spend it plotting their next filtration with trouble, or they can watch TV. Today's prisons-based tablets are on the cutting edge of carceral war. Privately owned digital communication firms such as Securus Technologies, the Global Telelink, GLT, are increasingly flooding in carceral systems with app-filled devices specially designed for prison context. Although these tools are publicly marketed as bringing fractured communities together, these companies employ predatory pricing strategies that extract scarce financial resources from already vulnerable communities and are rapidly replacing physical letter writing, which, as I have shown, is a central terrain of anti-incarceral revolt. These technologies are also facilitating new forms of surveillance and control. As GTL notes on its website, quote, deployed in facilities across the country, tablets offer more than just entertainment. They can help modify behavior, enable communications, and increase facility security, control, and operation efficiency. With relative openness, these new incarceral technologies aim to perform surveillance and behavior modification functions similar to those covertly tested by NYSIS, the FBI, and the CIA on imprisoned black revolutionaries during the 1970s. An investigation from the 2018 found that police in Missouri have used Securus tools for the warrantless tracking of non-incarcerated citizens, cell phones, and another from 2021 revealed that recordings of over 1,300 telephone cells between incarcerated people and their attorneys somehow wound up in the hands of New York prosecutors, violating attorney-client privilege and depriving people of their rights to a fair trial. According to the 2022 investigation by the American Civil Liberties Union of New York, Securus Technologies secure call platforms, quote, provides live and investigative support for law enforcement, featuring voice recognition technology and identification capabilities, as well as call monitoring, behavioral analysis, suspicious keyword notification, pattern analysis, and even location tracking of the called party. Increasingly ambiguous. Let me make sure that's ambiguous. I don't know. Increasingly ambiguous. Let me make sure that's ambiguous. I don't know. Increasingly ambiguous. Let me make sure that's ambiguous. I don't know. I'm gonna make sure. Yep, I was right. It's ubiquitous. Tracking technologies such as the electronic ankle shackles emerged from the research of Randolph and Robert. Oh my gosh. In fact, I can't say their last name. In fact, that links these so-called alternatives in incarceration to the disavowed and experimental underside of this incarceral war. Back in 1962, Robert, I can't say his last name, published a cross-cultural analysis of sensory deprivation research that compared data collected in the United States and Canada, most likely as part of the MK Ultra, which data collected from sensory-deprived Zulu and English populations in South Africa. 12 years later, Huey P. Newton cited his brother Randolph search on prison-based methods of coercive behavior modification. Thank you for putting that in. As an example of how state actors were increasingly experimenting with scientific methods of controlling people's minds and bodies. And their co-edited Psychotechnology, Electronic Control of Mind and Behavior, Robert explains that their collective intellectual project was to discover how to move individuals from one state of being to another while controlling the vehicle used to facilitate that movement, as well as the nature of its accepted course. A gentle way of describing a total assault on human autonomy. I'm going to try it. The Skanwetsensibles, can't say it, the one that Lynn put in there, experiments have continued materially relevance to tens of thousands of people who are subject to myriad forms of electronic monitoring today. In fact, that these technologies are seamlessly targeting communities on both sides of the prison walls forces us to contend with another key insight of this book. Prison struggle are never just about prison. Prisons are really an extension of our communities, wrote the BPP and the BLA members, Zaid Malik Shakura, in a 1970 essay entitled "America is the Prison," of course. He continued, building the insight of Queen Mother Moore and Malcolm X, quote, "We have people who are forced at gunpoint to live behind concrete and steel. Others of us in what we ordinarily think of as the community live at gunpoint against in almost the same conditions." This black radical theory of carcerality was a generalized condition of being in North America, productively reframes contemporary debates about de-incarceration, driven by reforms at the state and federal levels. The total number of U.S. adults under some form of correctional control, incarceration, probation, parole was declined from over 7 million in 2010 to just over 5.5 million at the end of 2020, its lowest point since 1996, though hailed by many as evidence of incremental progress towards a more just world. This development is underwritten by these emerging carceral technologies that allow state actors to functionally incarcerate people where they live, in what James Kilgore calls techno cells without walls. While disconcerting, this rapidly shifting carceral landscape was in some ways anticipated by people who were fighting against the prison in order to change the world, but those ideas were criminalized, incarcerated, and discounted. Journalists and scholars have increasingly argued that the post 9/11 context counterinsurgency has reshaped U.S. democracy and contributed to a generalized mode of governance that we are presently living through. Tip of the spear shows that the reconfiguration of national security discourse and practice after 9/11 reflected the metastasize of the outstanding anti-black, anti-radical, anti-communist, anti-Muslim domestic war. Moreover, it offers the prison as a method of analyzing and resisting the relations of power and techniques of rule that shape the broader world. According to the extent that valuable lessons can be acquired from thinking with this book, these lessons do not apply only to what has happened and is happening inside prison jails, immigrant detention centers, black sites, and other zones of official state captivity. They also apply to what is unfolding beyond them. However, I avoid didactically I can't say the damn word. Let me go ahead and look up this word, everybody. Delineating. I can't say it. I have to hear it. Word. Let me go ahead and look up this word, everybody. Delineating. I can't say it. I have to hear it. Delineating. Got it. Once I heard it, I know what it is. Delineating what I think these lessons are to encourage communities engaged in progressive, radical, and revolutionary struggle to consider these insights in relations to their material conditions and to reach their own conclusion. Some may be wondering when the long Attica revolt ended. For this, I have already provided an answer. Attica is the Attica Brothers Foundation, of an organization led by Attica survivors who are preserving the memory of their struggle. Attica is the 2003 Pelican Bay hunger strike that began when imprisoned members of rival gangs collectively resisted indefinite solidarity, confinement by communicating their toilet drains. Through their toilet drains, Attica is the movement to free political prisoners and to support them for their well-being beyond release. Attica is an international movement to oppose imperialist wars, colonialism, displacement, apartheid, and racist nationalism. Attica is a struggle to develop progressive, radical, and revolutionary black masculinities that are accountable to black communities. Attica is the Black Lives Matter organizer who refuses to be incorporated into the counterinsurgency nonprofit and influencer industrial complex. Attica is the movement to oppose liberal reformist logics that present gender-responsive and feminist jails as viable solutions to gender-based violence. Attica is the collective rebellions against racist police terror and the movement to stop Cop City, a plan to destroy 85 acres of Georgia South River forest to construct a facility to train police officers in urban warfare. Attica is Black August Resistance, an annual celebration of Black radical and revolutionary history that grew out of California prison system. Attica is participatory defense campaigns to free incarcerated people, especially criminalized survivors of sexual violence. Attica is the study group that sees revolutionary ideas that break through in moments of rupture. Attica is Jailhouse Lawyer Speaks, imprisoned people who fight human rights through political education, who organize unprecedented national prison strikes on September 9th in both 2016 and 2018 to coincide with anniversaries of Attica Rebellion. Attica is living traditions of criminalized Black radicalism, born of nurtured amid conditions of war. Attica is racist state repression. Attica is revolution abolition. Notes. And that's it. That's it, everybody. That's it. That is it. Should we have a conversation? If anyone wants to come up and have a conversation, this is the end of the book. We're going to move on to the next book, and I'll let you know what we're going to do next. Let's anybody want to come up and have a conversation before I move on? Where is it at? Where's my book at? There it is. Anybody? Nope, no one wants to come up. I know you would. I know you would. I know you would come up. And I think Dooley came in late. So the next book, let's look at